The shots had already ceased echoing across the valley when Jonathan Cole dropped from his horse and rushed toward his fallen brother. A haze of dust and smoke still drifted through the mountain air, carrying the bitter smell of gunpowder mixed with pine. Cal Cole sprawled motionless in the earth, his breathing forever stilled. With trembling hands, Jonathan knelt down and carefully rolled his brother over. A single shot had torn clean through his heart. Cal's vacant stare looked up at nothing, the light already gone from his eyes. Whatever final words he might have whispered had been lost before Jonathan could reach his side. Gently, Jonathan retrieved his brother's fallen hat and placed it tenderly over Cal's still face. Death wasn't new to him. He'd laid soldiers to rest during the war, buried ranch hands trampled in stampedes, and closed the eyes of strangers who'd met their end in saloon brawls. Yet this was different. This was his own blood, the last remaining piece of his family. The pain struck deeper than any wound he'd ever endured. Searching through Cal's jacket for the tin of matches he always kept close, Jonathan's fingers discovered something unexpected, a piece of paper, soft with age and worn from countless readings. His hands shook as he unfolded it with reverence. The words swam before his eyes at first, but when they focused, they hit him with the force of a physical blow. Cal, if you're still planning to come, I'll be waiting here at the homestead all winter long. The children ask for you constantly. I promised them you'd arrive. I don't ask for much, just someone to walk alongside me through this life. I realize I may not be what you once dreamed of, but I remain here. Jonathan's chest tightened as he discovered a second letter beneath the first, dated 3 months prior. Cal, I'll understand if your heart has changed. The boys haven't laid eyes on their father in more than a year now. I won't plead, but they're in need of someone. And truthfully, so am I. Georgia, with quaking hands, Jonathan carefully folded both letters and tucked them away in his vest pocket. Cal had never breathed a word about any woman, never mentioned children somewhere out west who were waiting for a man who would never make the journey home. Jonathan stood slowly, his gaze sweeping the barren hills where the attackers had already disappeared into the wilderness. He'd track them down eventually, but first there was an obligation to fulfill. 3 days of hard riding brought Jonathan to a settlement called Rivermouth. Barely more than a general store, a leaning church spire and a handful of weathered houses. Trail dust covered his clothes and hat, exhaustion etched deep in his hollow eyes. He inquired with a man hauling grain about a woman named Georgia. Georgia Ryland, you mean? The man replied, mopping sweat from his forehead. She's got property just beyond the apple grove. Large barn, painted white, though it's seen better days. 2 young boys always racing around wild. You won't miss it. Jonathan touched his hat brim in gratitude and continued on. The homestead stretched out against the endless prairie, its boundaries marked by drooping fences and half-tended fields, yet the main house stood resolute, weathered but determined. A woman waited on the front steps, her ebony hair braided severely back, her hands bearing the calluses of hard labor. A rifle rested against the wall within arm's reach. She went rigid when she watched him climb down from his mount. Georgia Ryland? Jonathan called out. Her response came firm, though her eyes held the color of storm clouds. That's me. Who might you be? Jonathan removed his hat respectfully. Jonathan Cole. I'm Cal's brother. The words sliced through the air like a drawn blade. Georgia's spine stiffened, color draining from her face. He's gone, she breathed. Yes, ma'am, Jonathan answered gently. 3 days passed. She turned away, blinking rapidly, then descended from the porch. Her jaw set with determination, though her hands betrayed her with their trembling, as Jonathan produced the letters from his pocket. I discovered these with him. Figured you deserved to have them back. Her fingers wrapped around the pages, gripping them as if they might vanish like smoke. Before either could speak further, excited voices erupted from behind the house. Mama! Mama, come see! A 6-year-old boy came racing through the dirt, barefoot and dust-streaked. His older brother followed close behind, wielding a wooden sword with fierce determination. Both stopped dead when they spotted the stranger. Is that Papa? The younger child shouted. Did he finally come home? Georgia's composure cracked as she sank to her knees, gathering both boys against her. No, my darling. This is his brother. This is Jonathan. The older boy fixed Jonathan with an intense stare, his eyes bearing the same shade as Cal's had been. You've got his look about you. Jonathan's throat constricted. And you two must be Zachary and little Zeke. The youngest beamed through his gap-toothed smile. I'm Zachary. Jonathan managed to smile in return. Your papa wanted more than anything to get here. He truly tried. Georgia rose slowly, her expression unreadable. You ought to stay overnight. I've still got his room prepared. That evening, after the children had settled into their beds, Georgia prepared 2 cups of coffee and joined Jonathan on the front porch. The night breeze pressed the dry grass flat, and wood smoke drifted from the fireplace within. She stared into her cup before finding words. What brought you all this way? Jonathan gazed into the darkness beyond the fields. Those letters. Because he should have made this journey, but fate had other plans. Somebody needed to stand in the place he intended to fill. Silence stretched between them while she studied her weathered hands. Finally, she whispered, I'm not looking for rescue. Jonathan's voice remained calm but unwavering. I don't believe you need saving. But perhaps you could use help fixing that broken fence line. The corners of her mouth lifted in the slightest smile, though wariness remained in her eyes. That sounds reasonable enough. By week's end, Jonathan had mended the western fence, gentled the wild stallion in the corral, and shown Zachary proper rope throwing without getting tangled up in his own feet. Each evening found Georgia watching him silently from the porch. The boys' laughter came easier now. The house felt less empty. Yet an unspoken question still hung heavy in the air between them. One night, Georgia remained at the supper table long after the meal ended. The children's footsteps creaked across the floorboards overhead as they headed for bed. She clasped her hands together and met his gaze across the flickering lamplight. I keep expecting you to ride out, she admitted. Jonathan held her stare steady. I won't be leaving. You don't owe me a thing. I understand that. But I choose to be here. Her breath hitched audibly. Jonathan rose deliberately, moved around the table, and knelt beside her chair. His voice stayed even, though his pulse hammered wildly. Because I witness how fiercely you protect those boys. Because you show strength even when exhaustion weighs you down. And because I believe my brother was foolish to keep you waiting so long. Georgia's eyes shimmered in the golden light. Jonathan reached forward, gently brushing a loose curl away from her cheek. Allow me to remain, not only for their sake, but for yours as well. She studied his face for what felt like an eternity, then leaned forward with trembling breath and kissed him softly. The kiss lasted only briefly, tender and uncertain, before Georgia pulled away. Her eyes darted toward the staircase where her children slept. This wasn't in my plans, she whispered. Jonathan remained kneeling, his hat still resting on the table. Mine either, but sometimes the path curves where you least expect it. She stood quickly, wrapping her arms tight as if shielding herself from an approaching storm. You don't truly know me. You don't understand this existence. It's more than just mending fences and tucking children into bed. There are nights when harvests fail, when rain pours through the roof, when I'm the only one left to face it all. You think you can simply step into this role because my letters ended up in your possession. Jonathan rose, his voice steady despite the sting of her words. I think I can make the attempt, and that's more than he ever offered you. Her eyes widened at the mention of Cal. Rather than anger, a shadow of grief crossed her features. She turned away, shoulders shaking, and spoke into the quiet. He intended to come. I truly believe that. Jonathan's jaw clenched. Then I'll be the one who actually does. The declaration hung between them, solid and unshakable. By morning's first light, Jonathan was already in the fields, splitting logs and inspecting fence lines. The boys trailed behind him like faithful shadows, eager to contribute. Zachary hauled nails in a tin bucket, stumbling more than succeeding, while Zeke observed everything with calculating eyes. You're not him, Zeke declared bluntly when Jonathan paused to wipe sweat from his brow. Jonathan nodded, setting his hammer aside. No, I'm not. The boy's chin jutted forward stubbornly. So why are you here? Jonathan met his challenging gaze. Because your father meant to come. He never made it. But I did. Perhaps that means something. Zeke scowled, but the words seemed to take root. He offered no response, simply returned to the fence, driving nails with unnecessary force. That evening, Georgia served stew and fresh bread at the table. The boys ate with enthusiasm. But she observed Jonathan across the dancing lamplight, noting how he spoke to them, how he waited for their plates to empty before serving himself. After the children retired, she poured coffee again and accompanied him onto the porch. Autumn's chill sharpened the air. You speak to them as if their words matter, she observed quietly. They do, Jonathan replied. Every word a man shares with a boy becomes a lesson. I want them to learn something beyond silence. She glanced down at her cup. Zeke's testing you. He'll continue testing. Trust doesn't come easy for him. Jonathan sipped his coffee, eyes on the shadowy fields. That's perfectly fine. I've faced tests before. Georgia offered a small, weary smile. I suppose you have. The following day, Jonathan saddled horses and announced they were riding to town. Zachary whooped with joy while Zeke crossed his arms defiantly. We don't need him taking us anywhere, he muttered. Jonathan looked him straight in the eye. Maybe not, but I'd appreciate riding alongside you. The boy hesitated, then climbed reluctantly into his saddle. The journey to Rivermouth stretched long and dusty. Cottonwoods swayed in the wind, their pale bark gleaming in the sunlight. Jonathan allowed Zeke to choose their route and set the pace. The boy rode stiffly at first, but by the time the store appeared ahead, some tension had melted from his shoulders. At the general store, Zachary discovered a carved whistle in a barrel and spent the entire visit testing its piercing notes. Jonathan exchanged eggs for flour and molasses while Zeke lingered near the tools, his attention caught by hammers and nails. During the return journey, Jonathan handed Zeke the reins. Your turn to guide us home. The boy's eyes widened with surprise. Then he straightened proudly in his saddle. You actually trust me? Jonathan's tone remained calm. You know these trails better than I do. For the first time, Zeke didn't argue. He led them homeward without a single backward glance. That night, as Georgia ladled stew into bowls, she remarked softly, he seemed different today. Calmer, not rebellious, just steady. Jonathan shrugged lightly. Sometimes a boy just needs someone to believe in him. Her eyes lingered on him as if seeing something new. Days flowed into weeks, the homestead's rhythm shifting with the changing season. Jonathan reinforced the barn wall, patched the sagging roof, and split enough firewood to last through winter's grip. The boy's laughter grew more frequent. Even Zeke began seeking his advice about rope work and horsemanship. But Georgia maintained her distance, watching him from porch and table, her expression caught between appreciation and apprehension. One evening, with the season's first frost painting silver across the grass, Jonathan came in from the cold to find her at the stove, sleeves pushed up as she stirred a bubbling pot. Her braid had loosened, one strand curling against her cheek. You labor harder than any man I've encountered, she said quietly. Jonathan hung his hat by the door. Because it's important. Because you're important. Her stirring hand went still. Slowly she faced him, eyes searching his features. You speak as if this has become your home now. It feels that way, Jonathan admitted. She folded her arms, wrestling with internal conflict. I don't want sympathy. I don't want someone remaining out of obligation. Jonathan moved closer, his voice firm. I'm not here from duty. I'm here because I choose to be. For you, for them, for this life we're building. Georgia's breath caught, leaving her momentarily speechless. The stove's crackling filled the silence. At last, she whispered, If you're staying, then stay completely. Winter's approaching fast, and I can't bear losing someone again. Jonathan reached out gently, covering her hand with his. Then you won't. Her eyes softened, though uncertainty lingered. Yet in that modest kitchen, with frost gathering outside the windows, something fundamental shifted between them, quiet but certain, like an unspoken promise already accepted as truth. What are your thoughts on the story so far? Share your reactions in the comments below. I'm genuinely interested in your perspective. The first snowfall arrived heavily, blanketing fields and buildings in pristine white. Jonathan rose before dawn each morning, hauling wood and tending livestock while the boys carved circles in the snow, their laughter ringing out until their faces glowed crimson. Georgia observed from the porch, apron secured tightly, following every movement with her eyes. Zeke grew more contemplative as daylight hours shortened, often watching Jonathan when he assumed no one was looking. One morning, while chopping logs, Jonathan caught his stare. Something weighing on your mind? Jonathan asked, resting his axe. Zeke wavered, then spoke with a voice harder than his years warranted. He could have made it here. Pa could have, but he chose not to. Now you're here in his place. Why? Jonathan drew a measured breath. Because sometimes men lose their direction. Your pa wasn't evil, Zeke. He simply never arrived. But I did, and I intend to remain if you'll allow it. Zeke's expression hardened. What if you abandon us too? Jonathan crouched to meet the boy's eyes. Then I'd be a coward, and cowardice isn't in my nature. The boy studied him intently, then gave one sharp nod before gathering an armload of split wood. That marked the first day he addressed Jonathan as Pa. As weeks passed, warmth returned to the house in ways beyond temperature. Georgia's laughter resurged, tentative at first, then richer. Jonathan found himself anticipating each evening, her voice reading beside the fire, Zachary's drowsy weight against his leg, Zeke whittling with practiced hands. It felt like genuine family, not borrowed, but earned through dedication. One night after the boys climbed upstairs, Georgia lingered beside the table. She set aside her needlework and folded her hands in her lap. I believed I'd spent forever waiting. First for Cal, then for better seasons, then for the boys to mature. I never imagined the waiting would end. Jonathan reached across the table, his calloused hand enveloping hers. You're finished waiting now. Her breath trembled as she nodded. Then she looked at him with clear, unwavering eyes. Stay, not just through winter. Stay for me. Jonathan stood, drawing her into his embrace. I already am. When spring's thaw softened the earth, they wed beneath the cottonwood beside the barn. The preacher from Rivermouth read the ceremony as wind tugged at his coat. Georgia wore a pale blue dress with pearl buttons, one her mother had preserved. The boys stood nearby, Zeke clasping Zachary's hand, while Jonathan spoke his vows like a man planting roots. I'll stand where my brother couldn't, he declared. I'll build what he never created with you for them. For as long as this land sustains me, Georgia's eyes shone as she whispered back, and I'll stand beside you not from necessity, but from love. The boys cheered as they scattered pine needles skyward, their voices carrying across the vast plains. Spring arrived with new beginnings. Cornrows rose green and proud. Zeke apprenticed at the town forge, his hands blistered but determined, while Zachary spent days chasing barn cats and scaling the windmill. Georgia tended her kitchen garden, hands steady, eyes soft when they found Jonathan. By harvest time, pumpkins lay stacked beside the porch, the smokehouse full of provisions. That night, Georgia labored long and hard, Jonathan never leaving her side. At dawn, a newborn's cries filled the room. A daughter with Georgia's delicate features and Jonathan's steady gaze in her tiny eyes. The boys took turns holding her, wonder written plainly on their faces. Georgia, exhausted but radiant, whispered through tears, "She's perfect." Jonathan cradled the infant, pressing his lips to her downy hair. "She's ours," he said. For the first time since kneeling in the dirt beside his brother's lifeless body, Jonathan Cole felt complete. Not because he'd replaced Cal, but because he'd chosen a life worth preserving. That evening, as stars illuminated the sky and the house glowed with warmth and laughter, Jonathan stood on the porch with Georgia beside him. Her hand rested against his chest, her new wedding ring catching the lamplight. "Do you ever wonder what might have happened if you'd never discovered that letter?" she asked softly. Jonathan gazed across the land, cottonwoods rustling like a sacred hymn. "Then I suppose I'd still be wandering, searching for something I couldn't name. But I did find it. And I found you." She leaned against him, her voice barely audible above the wind. "Then I guess the letter served its purpose after all." Jonathan wrapped his arm around her, the burden of loss finally lifting, replaced by something stronger, something that would endure through harsh winters and fierce storms. Through difficult years and blessed ones. Beneath the endless Wyoming sky, with family at his back and love in his arms, he knew he had truly arrived home.